The air in Hana's lab always smelled faintly of antiseptic and ozone, a sterile haven where emotions felt distant, muffled by the hum of machines and the glow of monitors. Hana preferred it that way. Emotions, she believed, were messy variables, unpredictable, unquantifiable, and prone to derailment. She liked order, the precise tick of science, the clarity of data. That's why her work focused on emotions, not to feel them but to control them. On that fateful morning, Hana stood at her lab bench, her gloved hands steady as she prepared a sample. The vial before her contained months of work, a delicate blend of neuropeptides designed to regulate emotional responses. This was her breakthrough, a compound that could, theoretically, inhibit the biochemical chaos that emotions brought. A gift to those who, like her, found feelings an unwelcome distraction. Dr. Lee, her assistant, called from across the lab, "The environmental control systems are running a diagnostic. Should we pause the experiment?" Hana glanced at the monitor. The system was flagged orange, not red. Nothing critical. "Proceed," she replied, her voice calm and clipped. There was always a margin of risk, and her calculations left little room for error. The compound glimmered faintly as she transferred it to a larger containment vial, securing it with a meticulous snap. Just as she turned to place it in the pressurized chamber, a muffled pop echoed through the lab. For a split second, time seemed to slow. Hana's eyes darted to the ventilation panel above her workstation. A fine mist sprayed out, a shimmering, iridescent cloud spreading with terrifying elegance. "Stop the system," she shouted, her voice breaking its usual monotone. Her assistant froze, wide-eyed, before slamming the emergency shutdown. The room's alarms blared, a cacophony of shrieking sirens and flashing red lights. Hana's mind raced. She knew what was in that mist, her compound, aerosolized. It wasn't supposed to be airborne. They hadn't tested it outside the controlled environment of liquid suspension. The others in the lab were scrambling for masks and evacuation routes. Hana grabbed her tablet, her fingers trembling as she accessed the containment protocols. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw the override failure flashing on the screen. The mist was already circulating through the lab's central air. One by one, her colleagues slowed their movements, their panic fading unnaturally fast. Hana froze, watching as her assistant, who had just moments ago been frantically pressing buttons, stood still, her hands at her sides. Her expression was blank, her eyes devoid of the usual glimmer of fear or determination. "Karen?" Hana's voice wavered as she stepped closer. "Are you?" "I'm fine," Karen replied, but the words were hollow, mechanical. Her gaze drifted to the floor, her face slack, as if the effort to emote had vanished altogether. Hana's pulse quickened. She turned to the others, calling their names, but the responses were eerily similar, void of tone, of urgency, of anything human. The room, once filled with the chaotic energy of an emergency, now felt disturbingly calm. Realizing the gravity of what had just happened, Hana stumbled to the intercom, her voice shaking. "Lab containment breach. Emotional regulator compound, airborne. Lockdown requested." The automated system responded, sealing the lab with a hiss of pressurized doors. Hana knew the protocol: no one in or out until the environment was declared safe. But it was already too late for her colleagues. It might even be too late for her. Slumping against the counter, she struggled to process what she had done. This wasn't just a lab mishap. She had created something beyond her control, something that stripped people of their very humanity. Her hands clenched the edge of the bench as the alarms dulled into silence. In that heavy, soundless void, she realized the bitter irony. She had spent her life trying to master emotions, only to unmake them completely. And now, the world outside that sealed lab was waiting to be next. Hana sat in her dimly lit apartment, the blue glow of her television flickering against the walls. The news anchor's voice, calm yet strained, echoed through the room. Reports confirm that an unidentified airborne virus is spreading globally, causing widespread loss of emotional capacity in affected individuals. The outbreak, originating in a research lab, has been nicknamed the emotional virus. Her name wasn't mentioned, but Hana felt the weight of every syllable like a blade. This was her fault. The broadcast cut to footage from cities around the world, bustling streets now eerily quiet, children playing in silence, protesters marching with vacant faces. Chaos, stripped of its emotional core, became something far more unsettling, a mechanical monotony. Hana clenched her fists, her nails biting into her palms. She had been released from quarantine under strict conditions after testing negative for exposure, but the guilt tethered her to the apartment. Every face on the screen, every vacant stare, was a reminder of what she had unleashed. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She ignored it. The calls had been relentless, government officials demanding answers, journalists clamoring for details, former colleagues accusing her of ruining their lives. She couldn't face them, couldn't face anyone. Outside her window, the world had changed. The once vibrant city was muted, its usual cacophony replaced by the steady hum of engines and footsteps. Hana's neighbors passed each other on the sidewalks, exchanging blank nods. No laughter, no arguments, no greetings. Just silence. In the distance, she noticed a man stumble and fall. People nearby paused, their movements deliberate and devoid of concern. No one rushed to help him, no hands extended to lift him back to his feet. The man rose on his own, brushed off his clothes, and continued walking, his expression empty. Hana turned away, her chest tight. She couldn't breathe in this world she'd inadvertently created, a world without connection or care. The television droned on in the background. Researchers worldwide are scrambling to understand the virus, but progress is slow. Experts fear the loss of emotional capacity could lead to irreversible societal collapse. Hana's hands trembled as she switched off the TV. Her thoughts were loud in the silence, I have to fix this. She couldn't undo the damage, but she had to try to make it right. The government office was cold and impersonal, all sharp angles and fluorescent lights. Hana sat stiffly in the waiting room, her hands gripping the edges of her chair. The faint hum of the air conditioning was the only sound, punctuating the uneasy silence of the space. Across from her, a pair of agents stood watch, their faces expressionless, a reminder that even those meant to protect could no longer feel concern. The door opened with a quiet hiss, and a man stepped into the room. Elon Musk was exactly as she'd seen him in interviews, unassuming yet commanding, dressed in a casual blazer and jeans as if he were heading to a tech conference rather than a crisis meeting. What struck Hana wasn't his appearance but his eyes, sharp, calculating, and undeniably alive. In a world gone numb, they were startlingly vibrant. Hana Lee, Elon said, his voice a mix of curiosity and amusement. The infamous scientist. She flushed, her stomach knotting with shame. I prefer, scientist trying to fix her mistake. He smirked, dropping into the chair across from her. Fair. You're not the first scientist to play with fire. You just happened to create the biggest inferno. Hana's temper flared, a rare and unfamiliar feeling in this emotionally barren world. This isn't a joke. People are suffering. His smirk softened. I know. That's why I'm here. She studied him, wary. He was famously eccentric, and she had doubts about his motives. Why are you immune? That's the billion-dollar question, he replied, leaning back. I've had every test under the sun, blood work, brain scans, genetic mapping. Nothing's conclusive. Apparently, I'm just built differently. Hana rolled her eyes before catching herself. A flicker of normalcy in an otherwise surreal existence. Do you even understand what's at stake? Elon leaned forward, his tone turning serious. Of course, I do. The world is crumbling. Society doesn't function without emotions, no fear to keep people cautious, no empathy to hold us together. If this virus spreads any further, civilization as we know it is done. Hana hesitated, then nodded. I need your help. He grinned. I thought you'd never ask. Their collaboration began in a private lab he'd outfitted specifically for this purpose. It was a marvel of technology, equipment Hana had only dreamed of using. As they worked, their differences became glaringly apparent. Elon was erratic, constantly jumping from idea to idea, while Hana was methodical, focused on precision. Their arguments often filled the lab, punctuated by the occasional rare outburst of laughter. Yet, for all their differences, they made progress. Elon's immunity became the keystone of their research. His blood samples and neural scans held fragments of answers, clues to why his emotional capacity remained intact when the worlds had been stripped away. In the quiet moments between their work, Elon would share his thoughts on humanity, on emotions as both a gift and a burden. Hana listened, reluctant at first but slowly drawn in. He made her realize something she hadn't fully understood: emotions weren't just biochemical noise, they were the essence of life. And if she was going to save humanity, she'd have to rediscover her own humanity in the process. The lab was silent, save for the rhythmic tapping of keys and the occasional hum of machinery. Hana leaned over a monitor, scrutinizing the latest test results. Next to her, Elon reclined in a chair, flipping a pen between his fingers. His ease contrasted sharply with her tension. You know, Elon said, breaking the silence, it's ironic. You spend your whole life trying to suppress emotions, and now you're racing to bring them back. Hana shot him a glare, though her heart wasn't in it. It's not suppression. It's control. There's a difference. Sure, he said, spinning the pen into the air and catching it deftly. But control's just another form of fear, isn't it? His words stung, but she ignored them, turning back to the monitor. The results showed another dead end, no clear explanation for his immunity. Her frustration boiled beneath the surface, a sensation she hadn't felt in years. Why do you care so much? She asked, her voice sharp. You could walk away, leave this to the scientists. He leaned forward, his expression unusually serious. Because emotions are the core of innovation. Every invention, every breakthrough, it all starts with a spark of curiosity or frustration or hope. Without that, we're just machines. Hana paused, his words unsettling her. She thought back to her childhood, to the days when her emotions had been a burden. She'd learned to numb them, to focus on logic and precision, but had she lost something in the process? I never understood emotions, she admitted softly, surprising even herself. They've always felt chaotic. Unpredictable. They are, Elon said with a grin. That's the beauty of it. Chaos breeds creation. As he spoke, a breakthrough hit her, not in their research, but in her understanding. Emotions weren't just noise, they were the spectrum of human experience. Fear, joy, love, they all served a purpose, balancing and driving one another. The virus hadn't just stripped emotions, it had robbed humanity of its essence. Her thoughts were interrupted by a beep from the monitor. She glanced at the screen, her heart quickening. There, in Elon's neural data, was an anomaly, a small but distinct pattern in his emotional processing. This could be it, she said, her voice tinged with excitement. For the first time, she felt not just urgency but hope. They were getting closer. And maybe, just maybe, Hana was beginning to understand what she was truly fighting for. Hana stood in the lab, her eyes fixed on the monitor, but the data blurred together. Hours had turned into days, and progress was achingly slow. The anomaly in Elon's emotional processing offered a lead, but mapping it into a cure was proving elusive. The weight of the world pressed heavily on her, and for the first time in her life, she felt paralyzed, not by logic but by fear. Across the room, Elon was hunched over a holographic interface, piecing together neural pathways with the same casual confidence he brought to building rockets. He hummed a tune under his breath, oblivious to her growing tension. "We're running out of time," Hana said, her voice tight. "The virus is mutating faster than we can analyze it. Soon it'll spread to regions we can't reach." Elon didn't look up. Panic won't solve anything. Her frustration boiled over. "Do you ever take anything seriously? People are losing their humanity, and you're acting like this is some pet project." He finally turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Do you think I don't care? I'm immune, Hana. I could sit back, watch the world crumble, and feel nothing. But I don't. That's why I'm here." The words stung, not because they were harsh but because they were true. She had been so consumed by her guilt that she hadn't stopped to consider what drove him. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I'm sorry. I don't know how much more I can do. Every lead feels like a dead end." Elon stood and crossed the room, his tone softer now. "You know what I've learned from failure? It's just another step toward success. You keep pushing, even when it feels hopeless." She turned back to the monitor, her eyes scanning the data with renewed determination. "There's something I'm missing," she muttered. "The virus disrupts emotional pathways, but your immunity suggests an alternative route. If I can isolate it." Elon grinned. "That's the spirit. Now let's crack this thing." Their focus was interrupted by a sharp alarm. Hana's stomach dropped as a red warning flashed across the lab's main interface: "Mutation detected. Viral acceleration imminent. It's spreading faster," she whispered. "We're losing control." Elon placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "Then we move faster." They doubled down, working through the night. Hana pushed herself past exhaustion, her mind racing with possibilities. Elon's unyielding optimism, once grating, became an anchor, pulling her back from the edge of despair. At one point, Hana paused, her hands trembling over the keyboard. "What if we fail?" she asked quietly. Elon glanced at her, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "Then we fail trying. But we won't. You're too stubborn for that." His words sparked a faint smile, a small but significant victory in a world where hope was a scarce resource. As the night deepened, their work continued, teetering on the edge of darkness. Hana wasn't sure if they would succeed, but for the first time, she felt she wasn't facing the void alone. The lab was quiet, save for the soft hum of the machines. Hana sat hunched over the workstation, her eyes bloodshot and her fingers trembling with fatigue. Elon paced behind her, muttering under his breath as he toyed with a stray wire from the equipment. The air between them was thick with unspoken tension, their shared urgency driving them toward a breaking point. And then, it happened. "Wait," Hana said, her voice sharp enough to make Elon stop mid-step. She leaned closer to the screen, her heart pounding. "Look at this. The anomaly in your neural data, it's not just a mutation. It's an adaptive response." Elon moved swiftly to her side, peering over her shoulder. "Explain." "It's a bypass," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "The virus targets primary emotional pathways, but your brain has developed an alternative route, one that preserves emotional processing without triggering the infected areas." Elon frowned, processing the information. "So, you're saying my brain rewired itself?" "Essentially, yes," Hana replied. She turned to face him, her exhaustion momentarily eclipsed by a spark of excitement. "If we can replicate this mechanism in others, we could neutralize the virus." For the first time in weeks, Elon's grin was genuine. "That's it. That's our cure." Their breakthrough reignited their energy, and they dove back into the work with renewed vigor. Hana isolated the adaptive pathways in Elon's neural scans, painstakingly mapping out the mechanism. The process was tedious and exacting, but the pieces began to fall into place. Hours later, as the first prototype of the antidote was synthesized, Hana held the vial in her hands, her heart heavy with a mix of hope and fear. "This could work," she said, almost to herself. "It will," Elon replied, his confidence steady. "You've done it." Hana hesitated, staring at the shimmering liquid. Her usual clinical detachment was gone, replaced by a storm of emotions she wasn't used to feeling. Relief. Pride. A nagging doubt. She took a deep breath and smiled, a small, tentative expression that felt foreign but right. Elon noticed and nudged her playfully. "That's the first time I've seen you smile." "Don't get used to it," she said, but the warmth in her voice betrayed her. In that moment, standing side by side in the glow of the monitors, the antidote in their grasp, they allowed themselves a rare moment of hope. It wasn't over, but for the first time, it felt possible. The global summit was chaotic, a virtual meeting connecting the world's top scientists, political leaders, and tech moguls. Hana sat in the sterile lab, surrounded by monitors displaying fragmented faces from every corner of the globe. Elon stood behind her, his arms crossed, his expression unusually solemn. "This is our best chance," Hana said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "We've synthesized the antidote, but deployment will be complicated." One of the faces on the screen, a high-ranking official from the World Health Organization, leaned forward. "How confident are you in its efficacy?" Hana hesitated, then answered, 95%. "It's untested on a large scale, but the simulations are promising." 95 isn't 100, another voice cut in, skeptical and sharp. "It's better than doing nothing," Elon snapped, stepping forward. "You've seen the projections. In 2 weeks, the entire global population will lose emotional capacity. Without this, civilization collapses." The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Finally, the WHO official nodded. "What do you need?" Hana quickly outlined the deployment plan, dispersing the antidote via drones equipped with aerosolizers, targeting urban hubs first. Elon had already mobilized his resources, including his global satellite network and drone fleet, ensuring rapid distribution. As the meeting ended, Hana felt a flicker of relief, short-lived as an alarm blared across the lab. She turned to the central monitor, where a new warning flashed, "Unauthorized access detected. Data breach imminent." "Elon," she shouted, her voice slicing through the air. He was already at the console, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "It's a cyber attack," he said grimly. "Someone's trying to sabotage us." Panic clawed at Hana's throat. "Who would?" "Doesn't matter," Elon interrupted. "We need to lock them out. Now." They worked in tandem, Elon fighting off the attackers while Hana scrambled to secure the antidote's data. The tension in the room was electric, each second feeling like an eternity. Just as they managed to isolate the breach, the screen went black. "What happened?" Hana demanded. "They wiped part of the distribution algorithm," Elon said, his voice tight. "I can rebuild it, but it'll take time." "We don't have time," Hana replied, her mind racing. "Can we deploy manually?" Elon hesitated, then nodded. "It's risky, but we can bypass the automated system." Without wasting another second, they divided the tasks. Hana calibrated the drones for manual control, while Elon worked to patch the algorithm in real time. The lab buzzed with urgency, every movement purposeful. Finally, the drones were ready. Elon activated the first wave, his jaw set with determination. "Let's see if this works." Hana watched the monitors as the drones took flight, their sleek forms cutting through the night sky. The antidote dispersed in shimmering clouds, blanketing the first target city. The results were almost immediate. On the live feeds, she saw people pausing mid-step, their blank expressions softening as they blinked in confusion. A child began to cry, and his mother scooped him up, her face lighting with relief. "It's working," Hana whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. But their victory was short-lived. A warning flashed across the system: drones compromised. Manual override required. "I'll go," Elon said without hesitation. "No," Hana protested, her voice breaking. "It's too dangerous." He gave her a rare, serious look. "You can't do this without me. Trust me." Before she could argue, he was gone, heading to the drone bay. Hana's heart raced as she monitored his progress, her hands gripping the console so tightly they ached. Minutes felt like hours, but finally, the drones were back online, their payloads delivered. As the final cities reported emotional recovery, Hana slumped against the console, her exhaustion giving way to a fragile sense of triumph. Elon returned, disheveled but triumphant, a mischievous grin on his face. "Told you," he said, collapsing into a chair. For the first time in weeks, Hana let out a laugh, a real, unguarded laugh. They'd done it. Humanity, fragile and flawed, was safe. The world was waking up, but it was a quiet, tentative process. Hana stood in the middle of a crowded park, her breath catching as she watched people stumble through a haze of rediscovered emotions. Parents hugged their children, tears streaming down their faces. Couples embraced as though they'd forgotten the feel of each other's arms. Strangers exchanged bewildered, shy smiles, their eyes reflecting the same fragile joy. The antidote had worked. Slowly, the virus was retreating, and humanity was regaining its pulse. Hana shifted her gaze to a nearby fountain where a little boy sat at its edge, laughing as he splashed water. His mother stood behind him, her hand covering her mouth, unable to stop the sobs of relief. The sound, raw and uncontrolled, struck Hana in a way she hadn't expected. It wasn't just noise, it was life. Her thoughts were interrupted by Elon, who appeared beside her, a cup of coffee in hand. "Not bad for a couple of accidental heroes, huh?" he said, his trademark smirk firmly in place. Hana managed a small smile, though her mind was elsewhere. "It's strange," she said softly. "Seeing people feel again. It's like watching them wake up from a dream." "A nightmare," Elon corrected. "And you pulled them out of it." She shook her head, staring down at her hands. "Not just me. I created the virus, remember? This was the least I could do." "You made a mistake," Elon said simply. "A big one. But you also fixed it. That matters." Hana didn't respond. Instead, she walked toward the fountain, her steps slow and deliberate. She crouched down, dipping her fingers into the water, the cool sensation grounding her. For so long, she'd lived in a world of control, of calculations and logic. Now, standing amid the chaos of reawakened emotions, she felt lighter. Turning back to Elon, she said, "I've spent my life trying to understand emotions, to control them. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe they're not meant to be understood." He grinned. "Finally. You're catching on." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the park bathed in golden light, Hana allowed herself a rare moment of peace. The world wasn't perfect, far from it. But it was alive, messy and unpredictable, and that was enough. For the first time, she didn't need to control it. She just needed to feel it. A month had passed since the virus had been defeated. Hana stood in her modest apartment, sunlight streaming through the windows. The world outside buzzed with life, laughter, arguments, music, sounds that once felt like distractions but now reminded her of the humanity she had almost erased. Her tablet vibrated on the counter, displaying an incoming message. It was from Elon. "Any regrets, mad scientist?" She smiled faintly, typing back, "Only that I worked with you." A reply came seconds later, "You love it. Admit it." Shaking her head, Hana set the tablet aside and turned to the stack of papers on her desk. They were drafts of a new research proposal, not on controlling emotions, but on understanding how they shaped human connection. She had decided to dedicate her work to studying emotions, not as something to be fixed but as something to be cherished. Later that day, she visited the park where she and Elon had watched the world reawaken. This time, she wasn't just observing. She walked through the crowds, feeling the energy of life around her. A little girl darted past, laughing as she chased her dog, and Hana felt a tug in her chest, not guilt, not relief, but something warmer. As she sat on a bench, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and crimson, she realized how much she had changed. The scientist who had once dismissed emotions as inconvenient noise was gone. In her place was someone who understood their value, their messy, beautiful necessity. Pulling out her tablet, she sent Elon another message: "You were right. Emotions are chaos. But chaos is, kind of wonderful." For the first time, she didn't need certainty. She had the unknown, and it was enough.